Good morning, Mercy Kids. We are storybooking it up today. Ooh, just got myself. We're talking this week about what is racism, right? And this idea that just because of physical differences, right? People came up with this idea of race that says if our body looks different, then we are different creatures. We are different types of human. No, right? We're all human made in the image of God. And so this book is going to show us, it's going to help us to know what racism looks like, sounds like, feels like. Well, how does it work? And today specifically, this book is going to talk about the word segregation, which is one way that racism has worked out. It separates people. Okay, and the title should tell you what do we think about that. Okay, the title of the book is Separate is Never Equal. Let's read it. Okay, let's see. Sylvia had on her black shoes. They were shiny new. Her hair was parted perfectly in two long trenzas. It was her first day at the Westminster School. The halls were crowded with students. She was looking for her locker when a young white boy pointed at her and yelled, "Go back to the Mexican school. You don't belong here." Guys, what does that feel like? Well, for the rest of the day, Sylvia did not speak or introduce herself in classes. She kept her head down while walking in the halls, and when she got home that afternoon, she told her mom, Felicitas, what had happened. She said, "I don't want to go to that school anymore. The kids are mean." That kind of makes sense, right? This is her very first day. "Sylvia," said her mother, "no sabes que por eso luchamos?" "Don't you know this is why we fought?" her mom said. What do you think her mom's talking about? Fought for what? Well, 3 years ago, in the summer of 1944, Sylvia and her brothers, Jerome and Gonzalo Jr., and their parents had moved from the crowded city of Santa Ana, California, to a farm nearby in Westminster. Her father, Gonzalo Mendez, had labored for years as a field worker, picking grapes and oranges. And now he was leasing a farm. He was going to be the boss. And on their new farm, they were going to grow asparagus and chilies and tomatoes. Okay, right? Being your own boss. It's a little different, right? When he was working before, he was working for other people. Now he's going to be his own boss. Well, as the summer came to an end and on the first day of school neared, Aunt Soledad drove Sylvia and her brothers and their cousins, Alice and Virginia, to the local public school on 17th Street. There, looks pretty good, huh? Sylvia was going to enter third grade, Gonzalo second, and Jerome first. What a handsome building, Sylvia thought as they pulled in the parking lot. Trees lined the street. There was a playground with monkey bars and swings. And when they walked into the school, they noticed the hallways were spacious and clean. "I'm here to enroll the children in school," Aunt Soledad said when they got to the principal's office. The secretary gave Aunt Soledad 2 enrollment forms. How many kids do you see? 2 enrollment forms, one for Alice and one for Virginia. But she did not give her forms for Sylvia and her brothers. "They cannot attend this school," said the secretary. "They must go to the Mexican school." What's going on? Why do I have to go to the Mexican school? Sylvia wondered. She was not Mexican, she was American. She spoke perfect English. Her father was from Mexico, but he became a U.S. citizen, and her mother was from Puerto Rico, which was a U.S. territory. Aunt Soledad, what do you think she's feeling? She was upset. She said, "But we all live in this part of town." Sylvia looked at her cousins. What are you noticing? They had light skin and long auburn hair, and their last name was Vidari. Their father was Mexican, but of French descent. Okay, then she looked at her brothers and her own bare hands and arms, and she wondered, there's a question she's asking, is this because we have brown skin and thick black hair, and our last name is Mendez? Right? That sounds more Mexican, right? "Well, rules are rules," said the secretary. "The Mendez children have to go to the Mexican school." "Well, I will not be enrolling any of them," said Aunt Soledad, and she stormed out of the office, taking Sylvia and the other children with her. What do you think? Would you feel like Aunt Soledad or the secretary? What would you feel like? She's mad, right? The word stormed means she's mad. When they arrived home, Aunt Soledad told Sylvia's father what had happened. Mr. Mendez told her not to worry. It had to be a mistake. Okay, he would take care of it. He was a businessman. He was used to dealing with people. And so the next day, Mr. Mendez met with Mr. Harris, the superintendent, right? He's like in charge of everybody, the principals, the teachers. Mr. Mendez explained that his family just moved to a nearby farm and the public school on 17th is closest to my house. The children have to go to the Mexican school, said Mr. Harris. What do you think so far? What do you think Mr. Harris is thinking? Why? Asked Mr. Mendez. He didn't get any answer other than, this is how it's done. You ever been told that? It's kind of like getting told, because I said so. And it makes you wonder sometimes, doesn't it? Well, and in the following days, Mr. Mendez, he's not given up. He met with Mr. Atkinson, the county superintendent, Mr. Harris's boss, and then with the school board, which oversaw all the schools, and they all said the same thing. Your children have to go to the Mexican school. But why? Mr. Mendez kept asking, and no one would give him a satisfactory answer. It's a good question, isn't it? Why? Well, that fall, Sylvia and her brothers had to attend Hoover Elementary, better known as the Mexican School, on Olive Street in the city of Westminster. Okay, do you remember what the other school looked like? The building was a clapboard shack and the halls were not spacious or clean. A cow pasture surrounded the schools. The student had to eat their lunch outside and flies would land on their food. And there was an electric wire that surrounded the pasture to keep the cows in. Does that sound safe? If you touched it, you received a shock. The school didn't have a playground, not even a swing. Okay, so let's think, right? They said you have to go to the school. That's one thing. And then now when we look at the schools, let's remember what the title of this is. It says separate is never equal. These are two separate schools. What do you think? They look equal so far? The Mendez family did not give up. Time and again, Sylvia heard her father talk with coworkers, friends, and parents. It's not fair that our kids have to go to an inferior, do you know that word? A worse than school. It's not just the building that's the problem, although that is a problem. The teachers at the school don't care about our children's education. They expect them to drop out by 8th grade. How are our children going to succeed and become doctors or lawyers or teachers? Okay, so he said not just the building, something about people's attitudes at this school about their kids was wrong. Do you think your teacher thinks you're going to drop out by 8th grade? Not finish? I don't know. Mr. Mendez created a group called the Parents Association of Mexican American Children. He tried to collect signatures for a petition, so he get a whole bunch of people to sign a paper, to integrate the schools regardless of skin color or background so that they could have the same opportunities. But every time he asked someone to sign it, he would get the same answer. No queremos problemas. We don't want any problems. See, now many of the parents, they worked on farms owned by white families. And so they worried that they would lose their jobs if they supported the petition. So think about that. What's not great about that, right? If you're my boss and you're white, I might be afraid to sign something, thinking that if I did something that would help my kids into a better school, it might actually hurt me at my job. Does that make sense? One day a truck driver, look at that sign, oof. One day a truck driver overheard Mr. Mendez trying to convince a worker to sign his petition. Well, you know, said the truck driver, you could file a lawsuit. Okay, and that means that we're going to start talking to some people in the courts, judges and lawyers. The truck driver told Mr. Mendez about a lawyer named David Marcus who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of the people in San Bernardino, and he helped them integrate into public pools there. Okay, at that time, not only were schools segregated or separate, okay, but other public places too, pools, parks, movie theaters. Some businesses even had signs that read no dogs or Mexicans allowed. What is so off about that? Do you hear, right? No dogs or Mexicans. Mr. Mendez decided right there to hire Mr. Marcus, even if it meant having to spend all of his savings to do so. Does that sign make you think or feel? Over the next few months, Mr. Mendez and Mr. Marcus traveled all over Orange County looking for people who had experienced similar problems. Now think about who's doing all the work right now. Sylvia watched her father leave early in the morning. Sometimes she saw him come home late in the evening, but often only heard his footsteps when he got in late at night. While he was away, Sylvia's mother had to take care of the farm. Mr. Mendez would get Sylvia and his brothers ready for school, and she would go out to the fields. She started the irrigation system, drove the tractor, oversaw the workers, solved any problems that arose. So her family is working real hard, right? Working real hard to make this happen. Well, with the help of Mr. Marcus, Mr. Mendez found and talked with other families who were dealing with segregation. One of them was the Estrada family. Mr. Estrada had fought in World War II. He had risked his life next to Americans of all races and backgrounds. Right? When you go to the army, there are people with white skin and black skin and brown skin, and they're all fighting for the country. And so to come home, you get the difference? We're going to do this job together, we're going to work together, and then I'm going to go home and you're going to tell me we have to be separate? That's what he's not liking. When he returned to America, he found out his children were not allowed to the white school, and he said, "Es una injusticia." It's an injustice. That's a good word. Injustice. In mean like not just, not right, not fair. The Estrada family joined the Mendez case, and so did 3 more families. The families were all from different schools in Orange County: Westminster, Garden Grove, El Medina, and Santa Ana. Mr. Marcus wanted to show the segregation of students affected not only Sylvia and her brothers, but more than 5,000 children in the public school system all over Orange County. On March 2nd, 1945, Mr. Marcus went to the courthouse and he filed his lawsuit. He turned in the paper that said, "This is a problem." So there was a trial. It was held at the courthouse in Los Angeles. Sylvia and her family dressed in their best clothes and sat in the courtroom to listen. It lasted 5 days. What do you think it was like to sit in there for 5 days? Each day, Mr. Marcus called to the stand parents from different districts. When you go to the stand, you come up here and you get to speak out to the whole court. And the superintendents from each district, too. Well, on the first day, Mr. Kent, the superintendent, remember that guy, of Garden Grove, was questioned. He said that children were sent to the Mexican school to help them improve their English. That's a lie, thought Sylvia. Her English was as good as the English of any of the children at the Westminster school. "Do you give the children any tests?" asked Mr. Marcus. Mr. Kent claimed he did. "We do so by talking to them." That's another lie, Sylvia wanted to yell. No one had ever asked her questions. They rejected her from the first school without asking her a thing. Do you remember that? Did anyone say, "Sylvia, do you speak English?" "For what reasons do you send children to the Mex school? For what other reasons?" asked Mr. Marcus. Sylvia and her family braced themselves for what they might say next. "For their social behavior. They need to learn cleanliness of mind, manner, and dress. They are not learning it at home. They have problems with lice, impetigo, tuberculosis. They have dirty hands, faces, necks, and ears." The Mendez family and others in the room just stared at Mr. Kent in disbelief. What he was saying is not true. It was degrading, right? Degrading means those words are tearing families down, not true things. How many of the 292 children at the Mexican school are inferior, remember that word, worse than, whites in personal hygiene? At least 75%, he said. What do you think about that? That means, like, most of them. In their scholastic ability, how smart they are, 75%. In what other respects are they inferior? In their economic outlook, how much money they have, in their clothing, their ability to take part in the activities. Do you believe that white students are superior to the Mexicans in the respects you have mentioned? Yes, he said. And that is one of the reasons they're being segregated? Yes. Time and time again, Mr. Mendez had asked, "Why can't my children attend the Westminster school?" And now he had his answer. What does that mean? What do you think? What is the answer that the court is saying right now? On the second day, Mr. Marcus called to the stand a 14-year-old student from the Mexican school in El Medina. Her name was Carol Torres. She spoke perfect English. It was clear that she had not been sent to the Mexican school because she had problems speaking the language, as the defense lawyers claimed. Mr. and Mrs. Mendez were questioned on the third and fourth day, and so was Mr. Harris, the superintendent of the school. Sylvia was not called to the stand, but she was ready to testify if they asked her to. She tried to look her best every morning and practice what she would answer. And on the fifth and final day of the hearing, Mr. Marcus was called to the stand. He called to the stand 2 education specialists to explain why it was bad to segregate children into different schools. Okay, so now this is someone who's saying, no, this is not right. Listen to what they say. Segregation tends to give an aura of inferiority. It spreads the idea that people are worse. In order to have the people of the United States understand one another, it's necessary that they live together. Doesn't that sound right? Can you understand someone if you never talk to them? The public school is one place, one mechanism where all children of all the people can go. The judge nodded his head. He seemed to agree with this. Well, Judge Paul McCormick took almost a year to give his decision. But when he did, he ruled in favor of the Mendez family. He said that public education must be open to all children by Unified School Association, regardless of lineage. Meaning, no matter where you come from, no matter what your history is. That means everyone must be allowed to attend school, no matter what his or her race or background. The Mendez victory made newspaper headlines. Sylvia's family was ecstatic, but they still did not have much time to celebrate because the school board appealed the decision. That is, they asked the judges with more authority to review the case and change the results. They did not like what the schools or the judge decided. So this case was reviewed by the Court of Appeals in San Francisco. During the appeal, the Mendez family received support from the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Japanese American Citizens League, the American Jewish Congress, and other organizations. In other words, a bunch of people are like, no. The judge was right. The group sent letters with information and asked the judge to rule in favor of the Mendez family. Sylvia was amazed that people of different backgrounds in different parts of the country who never even met her family were getting involved. And they were trying to help, but her mother said, "Cuando la causa es justa, las demás te siguen." When you fight for justice, others will follow. On April 15, 1947, the judges in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendez family again. That June, Governor Earl Warren signed the law that said all children of California were allowed to go to school together, regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. So remember, said Sylvia's mother, we fought. Remember when she said this is what we fought for? We fought to make sure you could attend a good school and have equal opportunities, right? Equal chances to learn and do things. Sylvia thought long and hard about what her mother said. The next day she returned to Westminster School. This time she did not have to listen to any whispers. Oh, no, she did not listen. She didn't choose to. Any whispers. She ignored the children who pointed at her and called her names. Instead, she held her head high. Her parents had fought, not only for her and her brothers, but for all that classmates. And looking around, she saw that other children were smiling at her. By the end of the day, she had made one friend. And by the end of the school year, she had made many friends of different backgrounds. And she knew her family had fought for that. Okay? You think, right? Sometimes when you just spend some time with people, she makes some friends. Here's pictures of her family. This is her. Okay, and so the question is to think about, again, right? Did segregation seem equal? Did it seem like the reasons for doing it were good? Okay, and who was doing all of that work? Okay, is that fair? So there's some questions to talk about. So, right, we believe in God's kingdom there are people of all different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, all different stories, and we believe that we all belong together, and we believe that God's grace is big enough for everybody, and everybody deserves it. Okay?